Looking for magic cards? At flipsidegaming.com you can now use the promo code LVD to get a 10% discount on orders over $10 while supporting the channel at the same time. Hello and welcome to another modern gameplay video. Today we're taking a look at the blue-black Faeries, which is a pretty controlling archetype, and one of the key cards in the archetype is Bitter Blossom, a 2-mana tribal enchantment that also counts as a fairy, and at the beginning of our upkeep we lose 1 life and make a 1/1 black fairy rogue creature token with flying, which can get out of hand very quickly. And Bitter Blossom synergizes very nicely with Spellstutter Sprite, 2 mana for a 1/1 fairy with flash and flying, so we can play it at instant speed. And when the Spellstutter Sprite enters the battlefield, counter target spell with convert mana cost X or less, where X is the number of fairies we control. And of course, with Bitter Blossom itself counting as a fairy and making even more fairy tokens, Spellstutter Sprite will be able to counter pretty expensive spells, as well as putting an additional threat into play to pressure the opponent with. And then looking at some other fairies in the deck, we've got 2 copies of Vendilion Clique as a 3 mana 3/1 legendary creature with flash and flying that can pressure the opponent as well as disrupt them, because when the Clique enters the battlefield you can choose a player and then take a look at that player's hand, and you may choose a non-land card from it to make them put it on the bottom of their library, and then they get to draw a replacement card, or you can just let that player keep all their cards if you are fine with what they have. And then we also have 2 copies of Mistbind Clique, which is a 4 mana 4/4 fairy with flash and flying, and it also champions a fairy, so when Mistbind Clique enters the battlefield, you have to sacrifice it unless you exile another fairy you control, which can also include Bitter Blossom itself, given that it's a tribal enchantment. And then when the Mistbind leaves the battlefield, you can return the exiled card, and when a fairy is championed with Mistbind Clique, you can tap all lands target player controls, so you can cast it during the opponent's upkeep to tap down the lands for their turn, and add a 4/4 creature to the board to keep pressuring them, so this is a way we can quickly close out the game. And then another fairy in the deck is 2 copies of Mutavault, which is a land that can turn into a 2/2 creature with all creature types, which of course also includes fairy, so that can be very relevant as well when trying to counter something more expensive with Spellstutter Sprite. You can always turn your Mutavault into a fairy. And then taking a look at the rest of the deck, you've got your usual suspects here: 4 copies of Fatal Push as cheap removal. We've got 2 copies of Opt as a nice cantrip that plays well with our Snapcaster Mage, so we can play it at instant speed. We've got 1 copy of Thoughtseize as hand disruption, alongside 4 copies of Inquisition, since we don't want to be losing too much life given the Bitter Blossoms. Then at 2 mana we've got 2 copies of Cast Down as more instant speed removal. We've got 2 Mana Leaks as additional counterspells, 2 Collective Brutalities as pretty versatile cards that can be used as removal, as well as hand disruption or potentially gain a bit of life, which can be useful with Bitter Blossom. Then we've got our 4 Sprites and our 4 Bitter Blossoms. Then 2 copies of Snapcaster Mage, which I put in the 3-drop slot since you're usually flashing back a 1-drop, like a hand disruption spell or a Fatal Push, and it's pretty versatile since in the matchups where you need extra removal, this can be an extra Fatal Push, and in the matchups where you need extra hand disruption or counterspells, this can be an additional counterspell, as well as adding a 2/1 creature to the board to pressure the opponent with. Then we've got our 2 Vendilion Cliques. Then at 4 mana we've got 3 Cryptic Commands as a versatile counterspell. Usually counter draw is the preferred mode, but every now and then you'll tap down opposing creatures or bounce a permanent. Then we also have 2 copies of Jason Mind Sculptor, which can be a win condition by itself, or provide a ton of card advantage. And then our 2 Mistbind Cliques. And then taking a look at our mana base, we've got 3 Creeping Tar Pits, which can also be win conditions, turning into 3/2 unblockable creatures, and our 2 Mutavaults. And then we have 4 Darkslick Shores coming into play untapped if they're one of our first 3 lands. 2 Field of Ruin, which can also destroy opposing non-basic lands. And then we've got 6 Fetch Lands, 2 Flooded Strands, and 4 Polluted Deltas, which can fetch up 4 basic islands, 1 basic swamp, and 2 copies of Watery Grave, counting as both an island and a swamp. And then taking a quick look at our sideboard, we've got 2 copies of Surgical Extraction as Graveyard Hate, as well as 2 copies of Nihil Spellbomb. We've got 1 Ceremonious Rejection to counter colorless spells, a Dispel to counter instants, Thoughtseize as more hand disruption, Disdainful Stroke to counter more expensive spells, an additional Collective Brutality against the more aggressive burn decks, Counter Squall as kind of a negate that has a bit of upside in our blue-black deck. We've got 2 Damping Spheres against Tron and Storm decks. We've got a Liliana the Last Hope if we need to get rid of 1 toughness creatures or in the grindy matchups, and then 2 copies of Damnation as a nice sweeper effect. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the play. And this hand looks okay. Not many fairies to be seen, but just a solid control hand with hopefully a creature matchup, so Fatal Push comes in handy alongside Snapcaster Mage, and we can take over with Jace. So we'll lead with our Polluted Delta, probably gonna fetch a Watery Grave tapped. But if we're up against an aggressive deck, we could always fetch a basic Swamp to cast a Fatal Push on turn 1. Turn 1 Mountain. Into Goblin Guide, alright, perfect. So we'll let the Goblin Guide hit us and then fetch a Swamp and cast a Fatal Push on it. And what does the trigger reveal? Field of Ruin, alright, so we got some value. Let's grab our Swamp. Might make it a little bit more difficult to cast Cryptic Command on turn 4, but since we have a Jace, we don't necessarily have to cast a Cryptic Command on turn 4. And we even have a Snapcaster Mage to get it back, potentially. Alright, pick up a Creeping Tar Pit, so now we have to decide if we want to have access to an Ambush Viper Snapcaster Mage to maybe jump in front of another Goblin Guide, or if we just want to play a tapped Creeping Tar Pit. I think tapped Creeping Tar Pit makes sense. And then next turn we can play Darkslick Shores and go Snapcaster plus Fatal Push potentially. Alright, opponent with an Ash Zealot, so opponent on a maybe budget mono-red deck. Still gonna be pretty effective here, since if we Flashback or Fatal Push, it's gonna deal 3 additional damage. And the Mana Leak would have been nice last turn, but I guess we'll just stick to our plan here. And a Ball Lightning. Well, don't really want to take 6, so I guess we're gonna Mana Leak that. And then take 2 more from the Ash Zealot. So we're down to 15. Alright, so I don't think we want to Jace yet, since Jace is very likely to just die. So I think we just play Island, keep up Cryptic, and if our opponent just attacks with Ash Zealot, we can perhaps Snapcast or Fatal Push the Ash Zealot, and then we'll have a Snapcaster in play to protect our Jace. I think that makes sense. If our opponent plays another Ball Lightning, then we can counter with Cryptic Command and maybe draw a card or bounce the Ash Zealot. Instead they're just attacking with the Ash Zealot. So I think we're going to Snapcast or push here, even though it's gonna cost us 3 life. And we'll take 3. And then next turn we get to maybe resolve a Jace. Start drawing some extra cards with the Brainstorm ability. Or we might just hang on to Cryptic Command. Now that we drew a second Cryptic Command, I think we just attack with Snapcaster and sit on Cryptic. Don't really feel inclined to tap out for Jace. Opponent goes for a Lightning Bolt on Snapcaster. I think that's fine, not gonna fight over it. It does take away our pressure, but I don't feel like we're in a hurry. Incinerate, we could counter, or we could just take 3 down to 9, which is still relatively safe. Given that we have 2 Cryptics, our hand is somewhat clunky, so I don't want to run into a situation where our opponent starts holding a bunch of burn spells in hand so they can cast them all in the same turn, and our 4 mana counterspell is going to be pretty inefficient. So I think it's okay to counter draw here, even though there's a chance our opponent plays a Ball Lightning next turn and hits us for 6. And draw Mistbind Clique. Don't have a Fairy to go with it at the moment. And it's just going to be Flame Javelin dealing 4 to us. Fair enough. Alright, so we can either sit back on Cryptic Command or we can start brainstorming with Jace. Could also just +2 Jace as our win condition. Start +2ing on the opponent, keeping lands on top and bottoming all action. Opponent is down to 2 cards in hand. I imagine if they had a Ball Lightning they would have played it last turn instead of the Flame Javelin, given that we're tapped out. Yeah, I think +2 on Jace also makes sense in the face of potential burn spells finishing off Jace. So we'll just target the opponent here, I think. So we'll Fate Seal them. And Mountain they can keep. Play Field of Ruin, say go. Definitely possible our opponent's holding a 4-drop that they can cast with the Mountain, but I'm gonna assume that our opponent's a pretty low curve deck and doesn't want to draw a 4th land. Alright, it's gonna be Incinerate, putting us to 5, so they're ignoring Jace. So they have 1 unknown card left in hand. And we're gonna untap with a Cryptic Command. Don't really feel like we want to Thoughtseize our opponent here. So let's just +2 them once again. And then Jace is just gonna be our win condition. Mountain they can keep. Play Field of Ruin, and we don't have enough mana where we can attack with the Creeping Tar Pit. Since the Field of Ruin's a bit awkward against the opponent with only basic mountains, since we can't fetch up additional blue sources. And the last card in the opponent's hand was a Glorybringer. Alright, probably just want to counter draw here. So our opponent was actually happy to draw the additional lands there. But from now on, any additional land they draw is essentially a dead card. Mutavault's nice since it lets us champion the Mistbind clique. So let's untap. And Vendilion clique is great too. Alright, now we're in great shape. I think we still +2 our opponent here. And Mountain they can keep. Alright, so let's play the Mutavault. And what's the fastest way we can apply pressure? Probably involves just playing a Mistbind and a Vendilion clique this turn. And then we can activate Mutavault to champion with a Mistbind. I think that makes sense. And we can tap down the opponent's lands, not that it really matters. And then we can also clique ourselves to grab the Thoughtseize. Probably want to start there actually. Since we're not going to be casting the Thoughtseize this game. Might as well get rid of it. Shows the opponent our hand, but we don't really care. And pick up another Creeping Tar Pit, that's fine. Might as well do this the right way in the opponent's upkeep, but not that it really matters here. So upkeep, we'll activate Mutavault, using itself. And then we'll champion the Mistbind. And then next turn we can attack with the Creeping Tar Pit and our 2 Faeries. Could have potentially also saved the Mistbind clique. And instead just cast it when the opponent's about to draw a relevant card to tap them out. But given the Jace, I think this makes sense. So our opponent plays a land. We've got 7 power in play. And 3 more with a Creeping Tar Pit. And a Collective Brutality is good insurance to have. So let's +2 once again. Another Mountain, so opponent flooding out here. Let's activate the Tar Pit. And our opponent packs it in. We also had a Brutality to drain them for 2, but we weren't going to need it here. Alright, so in the end, Jace actually didn't do anything since our opponent was just going to naturally draw all those lands, but Jace still helped us inform our decisions. So against an aggressive mono-red deck, what do we want? Counter Squalls and additional counterspell seems okay. We want the extra Brutality and the Dispel. Don't think we want Disdainful Stroke despite the Glorybringer we saw. I don't think we are too worried about the Glorybringer. And then what do we take out? Thoughtseize isn't great, so I could see taking one out. Even though if our opponent's going a bit bigger with 4 and 5 mana cards, Thoughtseize can be okay. But I'm gonna lean towards taking it out. Inquisition can be a little awkward since it can't take the Flame Javelin, since the convert mana cost is actually 6 and not 3, so we can't take it with the Inquisition. But overall, Inquisition's still gonna be quite useful at taking all the cheap burn spells and creatures. And then Bitter Blossom can be a little bit awkward if our opponent's on a burn-heavy draw, since it could just lose us the game. So I could see shaving 2 copies of Bitter Blossom. Don't think we want to take them out completely, since we still kind of need them to go with our Spellstutter sprites. But taking out 2 seems okay on the draw. Yeah, I think this is fine. Alright, how about this hand? Well, triple Fatal Push can be very good potentially, can also be pretty medium. I think we'll probably still keep. Definitely not a great hand, but can potentially line up well if the opponent starts with lots of cheap creatures. And our opponent does have the turn 1 guide, so Fatal Push is looking good. And this time does not find a land, instead another Mistbind clique. Another best draw here. And with the Polluted Delta, we kind of want to fetch a Swamp to preserve our life total, but we might have to get a Watery Grave just so we can have access to blue mana for Spellstutter Sprite as well. Point with an Ash Zealot. Given that they also have Ash Zealots, I guess we might be okay just fetching a Swamp instead, since we're going to be casting another Fatal Push next turn anyway. So Goblin Guide reveals Field of Ruin. Our opponent also with a Ramunap Ruins, so we will have a target for Field of Ruin this time to go fetch an island. And take 2 from the guide. And then next turn push the guide after the trigger once again. And Inquisition, not a bad draw. You could make the argument for Inquisition just because our opponent is running low on cards. And if we don't do it now, we might not get the chance to later. Let's say our opponent's holding a Ball Lightning, that's a nice target for Inquisition, and Fatal Push doesn't work on it. So I could actually see casting Inquisition instead of Fatal Push here. And our opponent's hand is a Molten Rain and Flame Javelin, so as I've discussed earlier, we can't take the Flame Javelin with Inquisition, but taking a Molten Rain is a pretty big deal here, since that could have set us back quite a bit. We'll play a Field of Ruin, which can next turn potentially fetch up an island, although if we Field of Ruin for island, we can cast Fatal Push. So it's definitely in a bit of an awkward spot here with our double Field of Ruin draw. Goblin Guide gets in for 2. And Mana Leak revealed, which is also not too hot here. So we're down to 13. And our opponent says go, so they did not draw a land. Alright, let's play the Field of Ruin and pass. And then the plan is to just Fatal Push. And Guide gets in for 2. And reveals a cast down. I mean, we could also just shuffle with the Field of Ruin. The problem, of course, is that we don't have a second swamp. So we would have to get an island and take 2. Drawing a cast down isn't great. I think we still want to kill the Guide here. And at least cast down gives us a bit of insurance against the Ball Lightning, for example. Alright, so we pick up cast down. And now the plan is just to Field of Ruin the Ramunap Ruins end of turn. Grabbing an island so we can have access to Spellstutter Sprite and Mana Leak. Opponent does nothing. So maybe stuck with some expensive cards in hand. So we're gonna Field of Ruin here, which opponent could have floated mana in response to potentially cast a 3 mana instant, but they didn't. And we'll untap, and an island. Alright, so now we're back in business here. We could always just flash in a Spellstutter Sprite so we can have a target for the Mistbind Clique for champion. Another Ramunap Ruins we can also blow up with Field of Ruin, which also enables Revolt for Fatal Push for what it's worth. So if our opponent plays a Ball Lightning here, for example, we can just Field of Ruin and Fatal Push instead of having to use Cast Down and grab ourselves another island. And there's a Molten Rain instead. Don't think we want to let that happen. So we can Field of Ruin, grab an island, and then Mana Leak it. Think that's probably fine. Alright. So we get to counter the Molten Rain. We still know about Flame Javelin in the opponent's hand. Untap, find Flooded Strand. We'll just pass the turn here. Hoping to be able to counter a 1-drop with the Spellstutter Sprite, but it might be a bit difficult. So end of turn, if our opponent does nothing, I will just flash in the Spellstutter Sprite, I think. So we have access to the Mistbind Clique. Alright, they're just gonna Ball Lightning us. So we also have Fatal Push with Revolt at the ready. Ball Lightning attacks. We can just fetch a Warrior Grave and then use Fatal Push so we can keep cast down for later in case of another Ball Lightning. And end of turn, I think we're just gonna flash in the Sprite. Could also see keeping it in hand, but I do want to be a little bit more proactive. Alright, get to untap. Inquisition's not bad, so we'll attack for 1. Inquisition our opponent, and then upkeep we can Mistbind Clique them. And their hand is just double Flame Javelin, alright. So our opponent's gonna Javelin our face. Down to 8, so they're ignoring the Mistbind Clique here. Alright. And another Ramunap Ruins, which does represent 2 more damage here, so we're technically at 2. So we will have to draw some action. Mutavault's not bad. So get in for 4. And then we could champion the Mutavault to tap them down again, but they're just gonna Flame Javelin our face, down to 4. So we might as well let them untap, I guess, in case they do something different. They just play the land for the turn. And they're gonna Flame Javelin the Mistbind Clique. Alright, so now we can Mistbind Clique. Championing the Mistbind Clique. And our opponent's gonna scoop it up. Alright, sweet, managed to beat the Ramunap Red. On to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw, sadly with the no-lander, which we'll have to ship back. Alright, this is a bit better, I guess. And do we want to keep a Snapcaster Mage? It is tempting, but I think we're just looking for lands at this point. Alright, another Delta, which we'll play, and then we can fetch a tapped Watergrave end of turn. Alright, our opponent may be on Merfolk. And yep, there we see a Mistcaller. And against Merfolk, we want to keep our counter spells and removal spells for the Lords, essentially. So here we're just going to keep up Mana Leak instead of trying to kill the Mistcaller. Mistcaller gets in for 1. And a Mutavault. And our opponent says go. So let's grab another tapped Watergrave, get that out of the way. Of course, getting islands against Merfolk means they'll have Island Walk with some of their creatures, but can't really afford to not play any islands. Alright, Creeping Tar Pit means we can just play that now and still keep up Mana Leak. Our opponent could definitely just attack us with Mutavault to play around a counterspell instead of committing anything to the board, which would be bad, but not much we can do about it. Instead, they're just going to attack for 1 with the Mistcaller. That's fine. And they're saying go. So we get to untap, pick up an island. So now what? We could just collect Brutality, the Mistcaller, keep up Mana Leak, but we don't really want to use a Brutality on the Mistcaller to begin with. So I think the plan is just to play an island, pass a turn, and now our opponent can't really just attack us with a Mistcaller anymore, since then we can just animate Tar Pit and block. Although they might still do it just to tap us out. So we might want to wait 1 turn to make that play. And our opponent is attacking with Mistcaller. So we do have the play of just animating Tar Pit and blocking Mistcaller. Then our opponent gets to resolve something second main, and we get to kill it with Brutality and then still keep a Mana Leak. I think that's fine. Or we could have decided to wait 1 turn, so we could have had Mana Leak up while animating Tar Pit. So Mistcaller down. And it's going to be a Silvergill Adept, revealing a Lord of Atlantis. That's fine. Don't really want to use the Brutality to kill the Adept, but otherwise it's going to start beating us down for 2. We don't have a great answer to it otherwise, given that we don't have a Fairy for the Mistbind Clique yet. So I think it's reasonable to just use a Brutality here, keep up Mana Leak. So we'll just give it -2/-2, given that I don't think we want to be discarding anything here. And there's no instants or sorceries out of the Merfolk deck usually that we're afraid of. I guess they could have a Vapor Snag to bounce their own Silvergill Adept. And then we'll just play a Darkflick Shores for now. Keep a Mana Leak. And then at some point we can start beating down with the Creeping Tar Pit. Although Mutavaults now, 2 of them are gonna become an issue. So our opponent has been playing around Mana Leak the entire time. But a cast down's not a bad pickup here. Alright, so we could animate Tar Pit, attack for 3, and then still have Mana Leak cast down up. Or we could just pass a turn, and then if they animate Mutavaults, we have cast downs at the ready, as well as still keep up Cryptic Command. Close call here. I don't mind just attacking with the Tar Pit just to apply a bit more pressure. And then hopefully we can draw into some more Faeries for the Mistbind Clique here. Alright, that's going to be 4 mana for Harbinger of the Tides, which we could decide to counter here if we wanted to, since that's going to threaten to bounce our Creeping Tar Pit. Don't know if we care about it too much. I think we're fine to counter here. So our shield's down on counterspells, our opponent gets to resolve whatever they want, but now that we have a cast down, we can retroactively still kill a Lord of Atlantis, for example. So Mutavaults are getting in there. 2 of them. So they're not going to expose any creatures to removal. And there's a Bitter Blossom. Alright, so now we want to switch game plan and kind of turn into a Bitter Blossom control deck alongside Mistbind Clique and Cryptic. So no longer going to start beating down with Tar Pit here. Let's just play Bitter Blossom, play land, say go. And we want to avoid taking any damage going forward. But you can imagine, had we drawn the Bitter Blossom earlier, we would have been pretty far ahead here with a bunch of Fairy tokens and a Mistbind Clique in play. Alright, it's going to be a Spreading Seas on the Creeping Tar Pit, that's okay. Don't really need the Creeping Tar Pit for our game plan anymore. And the Mutavault's going to get activated, so probably just going to use our cast down here. We could also champion the Bitter Blossom with the Mistbind Clique to ambush the Mutavault. Don't think that's good enough. And then I don't think we have to sacrifice a Polluted Delta yet. We can always sack it to get a basic land, so there's no real pressure on us to fetch right away. Also, if we draw Jace, having the shuffle effect afterwards is beneficial. So I'm not opposed to just championing with the Mistbind Clique here on their upkeep, tapping them down, and then we'll still have access to Cryptic Command as backup, so that feels pretty safe. So let's Mistbind. We'll champion the Fairy Rogue token and tap our opponent out. Alright. And still no reason to fetch with Polluted Delta. So this would be a spot where having access to Creeping Turpid would still be nice, since we could attack and then still keep up Cryptic. So the Spreading Sea is still pretty effective here. But a Mutavault, a nice draw. So we'll attack for 4. Play Mutavault and say go. Opponent with a Lord of Atlantis. I think counter draw is okay here. We could also bounce the Mutavault potentially, but given that we have our own Mutavault, we can potentially just block it. So let's counter draw. Pick up a Jace, which is decent. And an Aether Vial a little bit late to the party here. Alright. Get to untap, make another token, and draw another Mistbind Clique. Well, that's definitely going to be the play here. And we can play Jace alongside the Mistbind here, so that seems okay. So we can Jace. Brainstorm. And we have the Polluted Delta to potentially shuffle. And a Spellstutter Sprite's perfect, so we'll put back Inquisition and Darkclick Shores, which were totally fine shuffling away. We'll attack for 5. And then champion another Mistbind Clique. Opponent with a Merfolk Trickster to tap down the Mistbind Clique, fair enough. We could just Spellstutter Sprite here. That might be okay. Means we wouldn't be casting the Mistbind, but countering the Trickster, getting in an attack for 4. And then we still have Mutavault, which we can potentially also attack with. Yeah, that's probably worth it here. So let's Spellstutter Sprite. Plenty of Faeries in play. And then we'll animate the Mutavault. So we can attack for 7. So we're threatening lethal next turn. So not very likely that our opponent can kill us from this spot. But this is the exact scenario where Mistbind Clique really shines. And our opponent packs it in. Alright, so managed to get game 1 against Merfolk. How do we want to approach this after sideboard? Damnation can be okay, but our opponent was playing very protective of their Merfolk, not exposing them to removal spells, so maybe Damnation's not the best plan. Liliana can be okay. They do have a few one-toughness creatures, like the Silvergill Adept, that are probably happy exposing to a Liliana, which we can potentially kill, and the other abilities are still relevant. I could consider Brutality as an extra removal spell, but it doesn't seem necessary. So Damnation and Brutality are cards I'm not sure about. On the draw I could see Jace not being as effective. On the draw I could see cutting a Jace, making room for extra Damnations in case we fall behind. On the play we might want to switch that back out. And then what don't we love? Thoughtseize can be a little bit painful. They don't have too many expensive cards we need to get that Inquisition can't get. Yeah, I mean, all the other things are okay. Mana Leak can sometimes miss. If they have an Aether Vial, they can just vial in their creatures, and then Mana Leak's pretty inefficient. But otherwise, most of our cards are okay. So I don't think we need the third Brutality. Could see maybe shaving 1 Bitter Blossom on the draw. Even though, as we saw in that game, it's a pretty important card. Yeah, we'll try this. Alright, we've got an opening hand with Single Island Opt, which is a bit speculative here. We do need double black for Damnation and Liliana, so I don't think we can keep this one. With a black source, giving access to Inquisition and Fatal Push, this would be a lot better, of course, but as is, I think it's a little bit too risky. Alright, this is better. And a Spellstutter Sprite, not the most effective, can just counter a 1-drop, so I don't think that's good enough. And no turn 1 Vial, that's good. So we get a chance to Inquisition them here. And see what's up. Alright, our opponent's hand is double Phantasmal Image, Deprive, and Master of the Pearl Trident. So they don't have double blue, so they can actually cast Deprive and Master. But of course, if they don't have any creatures in play for Image, Image doesn't do anything either. So my guess is we just take the Master of the Pearl Trident as their only creature that does anything, and then leave them with Deprive, which they're pretty far away from casting. So let's take the Master. So we will need to find an answer to Mutavault at some point, since that can just start beating us down for 2. But for now we'll just play Creeping Tar Pit. And Mutavault also a big reason why Damnation's not always super effective. Spreading Seas on the Tar Pit, that's too bad. But we've got another one. And a Bitter Blossom, that's a great draw. So we'll let us pressure the opponent. And if we ever draw another Spellstutter Sprite, that's going to be turned on. And next turn we get to untap with Cryptic Command up, or we can start attacking with the Tar Pit. Opponent with a second Mutavault, so still no double blue, so they're just going to start beating us down with the first Mutavault. Alright, so what's at play? Can keep up Cryptic, or we can Brutality taking away the Deprive, but our opponent's not really in a position to leverage the Deprive yet. Or we can just attack for 3 with Creeping Tar Pit. I think we just keep up Cryptic for now. Trying to race with the Tar Pit would be better if our opponent didn't have 2 Mutavaults, since now if they just draw land and start attacking us with double Mutavault, we could take a pretty big hit. And our opponent's just gonna pass a turn, so we'll fetch end of turn for Watery Grave and untap. Get another token, and we can start attacking with the Fairy Rogue here, and Field of Ruin a nice pickup since that can deal with Mutavault. So let's attack for 1. Don't necessarily want to use a Field of Ruin proactively, since that will give our opponent double blue, which might open up some plays, but it's nice to have access to, so I think we'll still play it here. Opponent with Spreading Seas on Tar Pit. I guess counter draw is fine, since having access to the Tar Pit might actually be pretty useful here, and we do want to use our Cryptic Command at some point. Might as well do it now and find more action. And keep up 1 black mana to represent Fatal Push. And opt is not bad. So we can opt on of turn. And Fatal Push is fine. Alright, so we get to make some more Faeries. This would be a spot where finding a Mistbind Clique would be excellent, and our opponent's just going to pack it in here. Yeah, missing a few land drops and kind of getting punished for the Mutavaults, not having access to double blue mana. They're just a little bit too far behind. Alright, sweet, managed to beat Merfolk, on to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw, this hand looks okay. Lots of early interaction, and a Jace as a win condition. Let's see what we're up against. Turn 1 Steam Vents untapped, so probably gonna see an opt-on of turn here. But we're just gonna do the same, I think. Seems fine. So, don't know exactly which type of deck this is. Could be a blue-red Arclight Phoenix deck, could be a Storm deck, could be a Jeskai deck. Serum Visions now, so still doesn't really narrow it down. And the Sulfur falls into Delver of Secrets. Alright, good to know about. So I think we're still gonna opt here, and then we can see what we want to do next turn, whether that's Fatal Push or Brutality. Cryptic is probably good enough. We've got the lands to cast it, and it's a nice 2-for-1. And Inquisition, alright. So we probably want to Inquisition first, and then we can potentially Fatal Push the Delver as well. And their hand is Lightning Helix Remand. Remand's kind of annoying here when we have these 4 mana spells in hand, and we don't really care about the Helix, so I think we take the Remand. And leave them with 2 lands and a Helix. And then do we Fatal Push the Delver taking 2 from Watery Grave, or do we just play a tap land? I guess just playing a tap land is fine, and then next turn we can just Brutality the Delver, maybe escalating taking the Helix as well. Yeah, it's probably fine. So presumably the Delver's gonna transform here since they play the Serum Visions, but no. It's gonna be a tapped Hallowed Fountain and an attack for 1. Alright. And a Flooded Strand to draw. So I think we just Brutality -2/-2, and if it resolves then we can just play a tapped Watery Grave. So let's Brutality -2/-2. Could of course also lead with the Fatal Push, but it's a bit more mana efficient if this works. Alright. And there's Thing in the Ice, which is a perfect target for the Fatal Push here. So our opponent's got 2 cards in hand, including 1 Lightning Helix. So if we Jace, then we'll have to be careful about not just using the 0 ability, otherwise he'll die to the Lightning Helix. So I think Jace +2 on our opponent is probably fine. Yeah, let's go for it. And the Cryptic command we definitely want to put on the bottom. And then hope Jace gets to untap, and then we should be in a great position. With push as an answer to Thing in the Ice, Cryptic commands, good protection to save Jace. And even if they do spend 2 burn spells on Jace, I think we'll be okay. Alright, it's gonna be Snapcaster, Serum Visions presumably. Yep, that's fine. And this is gonna be interesting, so we'll definitely have to look at which cards our opponent keeps on top or not, given our Jace Fate Seal. But we're probably just gonna brainstorm with Jace next turn. And our opponent kept both cards on top there with the Serum Visions. So let's untap. Alright, I think we'll start with a brainstorm here. Alright, those are some nice draws. So a Snapcaster means we can push Snapcaster push. So we can probably afford to put back some lands. Don't need the Watery Grave. And can probably put back a 1 fetch land, keep an extra Creeping Tar Pit. That seems reasonable. Could also keep the fetch and put back a Tar Pit and shuffle it away. So we have an extra shuffle effect for Jace. Might also be reasonable here. So let's put back 2 lands. And then we can play our fetch land. And we could just push Snapcaster push right now, prevent our opponent from countering anything. And take away all their pressure from Jace. That's reasonable. Or we could just push the Snapcaster, keep up Cryptic command. That's also reasonable. I think push Snapcaster push makes sense. And hope they don't have anything scary that they kept on top like their own Jace, but then we can still pressure it with Creeping Tar Pit and Snapcaster, so still feels fine. Could also Snapcaster Inquisition, take away Lightning Helix, but I think pushing the Thing in the Ice is probably fine, even though we can always Jace minus on the Thing in the Ice. I would rather keep brainstorming with Jace. Alright. Target Fatal Push. And pass the turn. And we're probably just gonna fetch with the Delta end of turn. It's gonna be another Delver of Secrets, that's okay. And a Serum Visions. And once again our opponent kept both cards on top. So let's fetch end of turn here for a Watery Grave. Untap. And draw another Jace, good insurance to have. But I'm just gonna brainstorm again. And Brutality is not bad, Mistbind Clique's not bad. Probably want to put back Flooded Strands. And then a Jace on top. And then we'll attack with our Snapcaster Mage. And then I'm not opposed to Brutality with Escalate here, killing Delver, taking away a card from their hand. I guess if Helix is their only spell, then they get to cast it and we don't get any value from it. But taking away the Helix to clear a path for Clique might be nice. And then probably just discard the Mistbind Clique, even though it's great if the Vendilion Clique dies and it's pretty useless. So let's Escalate, 2 modes, -2, -2, and the rest essentially discarding the Mistbind Clique. And we still have Cryptic Command in case of a counterspell. Opponent's gonna Lightning Helix Jace, that's fine. And the last cards in their hand is a Cryptic and a Snapcaster, so got a nice Cryptic here. Get to kill the Delver. And think we're just passing the turn. If our opponent wants to Snapcaster Helix a Jace, we can counter it. So I think we probably just want to Cryptic the Snapcaster Mage here. Counter draw. Could also bounce our own Snapcaster Mage, but it doesn't seem necessary. We would rather have the pressure in play, pick up another Tar Pit, and an Opt. Alright, so unless they top deck a Bolt to kill Jace, we'll be in a great spot. As we're drawing an extra card every turn, now we can actually consider Fate Sealing our opponents to get Jace out of Bolt range first before we start brainstorming again. Island is fine. And then we can animate Tar Pits. Attack for 5. And then we can probably just click them right now before they get a chance to untap. Probably should have done this first, but I doubt we would have done anything different. To take a look at their last card, which is a Thing in the Ice, which we don't care about, so we can let them keep it. Since we can always -1 Jace to bounce it if it's close to transforming, and most of our damage is evasive with the Clique and the Tar Pit. So your opponent's going to draw an island. They're going to play the Thing in the Ice. And the Mana Leak is a good insurance as well. I mean, we've got a 2-turn clock essentially here after playing the Tar Pits. So we're probably fine just Fate Sealing once again, make sure nothing can go wrong. And a Bolt. We probably want to put on the bottom. And then we can animate Tar Pit. And next turn we can animate both Tar Pits. Although I guess we're 1 land short, but we might brainstorm into a land. And our opponent packs it in. Alright, on to sideboarding against a Jeskai, Thing in the Ice, Delver of Secrets deck. How do we want to approach this? Counter Squall presumably is decent. Could consider the extra brutality. Liliana's quite good against Delver, so that's also consideration. And the spell's going to be pretty good as well. Stroke can counter Cryptic Command, but is a bit narrow, so I don't love it. And I don't think we need Thoughtseize or Dominations, so brutality is a consideration as well. What don't we like? Thoughtseize dealing 2 damage is a bit sketchy, so I don't mind taking that out. The Fatal Pushes look great against Thing in the Ice and Delver. All the counterspell Bitter Blossoms look good. Cows Down can kill Thing in the Ice, whereas Brutality cannot. So maybe we don't need the Brutality after all. I could see Mistbind Clique not being great if our opponent can just keep all the fairies off the board if they counter Bitter Blossom and kill all the other fairies. Then the Clique's gonna be difficult to get into play. So I could see shaving the Mistbind Clique, even though it can be pretty great of course. And then I don't think we'll bring in the 3rd Brutality. Just bring in Dispel, Liliana, and a Counter Squall. That seems okay. Alright, what about this one? Double Inquisition's nice, Opt is good. And we have Bitter Blossom if we pick up a 2nd land, and we are on the draw. The 2 4-drops are not great, but on the draw with an Opt, we're probably likely to get a 2nd land at some point, and in the meantime Inquisition's good interaction, so it's a bit sketchy, but I don't hate keeping this. Turn 1 Serum Visions, that's good. Turn 1 Delver could have been a little bit scary since we don't have an answer to a turn 1 Delver, so seeing Serum Visions instead is good for us. I think we still want Inquisition first here. Next turn we might Opt before we play the 2nd Inquisition if we don't find a land. Alright, so their hand is a bunch of removal, Serum Visions and Remand, so we don't really care about a Bolt and a Path given our Bitter Blossom as our win condition. So we're looking at Remand or Serum Visions. Our opponent kept 1 card on top, 1 on the bottom with the previous Serum Visions. Opponent's also lacking white mana at the moment. So I think we'll just take the Remand to make sure we can potentially cast Bitter Blossom if we top deck a land. And also if they Remand or Opt if we're stuck on 1 land, that could be pretty annoying. And let them keep the Serum Visions. So they're gonna Visions again. Plays a Mountain, says go. And draw a Fatal Push. Alright, so probably have to just Opt here. Try and hit our land drop. And the Cast Down, we're definitely gonna bottom. And find a Liliana. Alright, so had a few draw steps to find a land, did not get there, so that's too bad. But our hand is still pretty decent. Now we've got a Fatal Push for a potential Delver. Still have an Inquisition. Opponent's going to aggressively Bolt us end of turn. Alright, so could indicate a Snapcaster Mage is incoming. Untap, and there's a Swamp. Alright, I think we just go for the Bitter Blossom here. Try and get the Bitter Blossom in play as soon as possible. If we were to Inquisition, they can just flash in the Snapcaster Mage and Bolt us anyway. So we'll get the Bitter Blossom in play first, before they can Snapcaster Remand it. They're gonna Opt. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have a Snapcaster with a Bolt, but still pretty aggressive there. Alright, opponent plays a land, says go. We get our first Fairy token and pick up another Fatal Push. So we could Inquisition them, that's probably fine, and then we can still Fatal Push, or we could keep up Counter Squall. Probably want to get the Inquisition out there before they empty their hand, and their hand is just 3 lands and a Path. Alright, well, guess we'll take the Path, and say go. And now that we have a Liliana, we can potentially deal with Snapcaster Mages and Unflipped Delvers with the +1 ability as well, which is quite good. Got double Fatal Push to deal with Thing in the Ice, so we've got plenty of answers here. And Bitter Blossom as our win condition. So don't hate our spot despite having kind of an awkward draw. And our opponent's just gonna pack it in. Alright, so probably drew another land. and the Bitter Blossom was eventually going to outgrind him, since, yeah, Bitter Blossom matches up pretty well against a bunch of spot removal spells like Lightning Helix, Bolt, and Path. And of course, given that we didn't play any lands, our hand is all spells, which our opponent was going to have a hard time beating. Alright, sweet, I want to thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this gameplay, and as always, have a nice day. I also want to thank all my patrons for being part of the channel, and you can become a patron yourself today and decide the topic of future videos over at patreon.com/LegenVD.